Okay, my name is Jillian Booth and I'm the Curator of Academic and Community Programs here at Legacy. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Hughes and SINYTEN, on whose traditional territories the Legacy stands, and the Saanich people, all of whom have looked after this land for time immemorial and who continue their relationship with this land today. I feel very lucky to have been born on Lekwungen territory with English, Irish, and Scottish ancestry. I have deep gratitude to be living and working here and to be sharing the stories and teachings from the Saanich people's continued and deep relationship to this land, which is what this program is about tonight. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see such good numbers. I'm hoping if you haven't been able to visit the gallery that this will be give you a sense of what's in the space. The exhibition To Fish as Formerly shares the story of the SWOLE, the Straits Salish Reef Net Fishery, through contemporary art, traditional knowledge, and historical documentation. The exhibition is about generations of Saanich people who are revitalizing the belief systems, spirituality, knowledge, and practices inherent to the SWOLE. Tonight, we will screen a 25-minute video tour of the exhibition. Then I will introduce the two curators for the Q&A afterward. You'll be able to ask questions then, but feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A function while the video is playing. I hope you enjoy the tour. And we can go ahead and play the video now. Hi, my name is Jillian Booth. I'm the Curator of Academic and Community Programs here at the University of Victoria Legacy Art Galleries. We're in the gallery downtown right now, and I would just like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and very grateful for the impeccable care of the land that they have undertaken for a time immemorial. And really also grateful to be here, working and living and talking to you about our current exhibition. So we thank the Lekwungen people and thank you for being here. Today we're going to be looking at an exhibition called To Fish as Formerly, which is about the revitalization of the SWOLE, which is the Saanich Reef Net Fishery. So the exhibition talks about the history of the SWOLE, the eco-cultural resurgence of the Saanich people through the revitalization of the SWOLE, and we also are going to be looking at contemporary artists who are exploring learnings that they've undertaken when they've been looking at the reef net. This exhibition was co-curated by Chief Nick Claxton of the Sayout Nation, who did his PhD dissertation on the land-based healing and education related to the reef net, and Katie Hughes, who is a recent graduate of UVic Public History. One of the things that Nick pointed out that's very important to this exhibition, but also to land-based healing and cultural resurgence, is language revitalization. The Saanich are working hard to revitalize SIՆCHOTEN. And what Nick was saying was that the language is completely place-based. So most, if not all, of the words are specific to this place. He gave an example of the word for ocean has the word orca in it. So whenever they talk about the ocean, they're considering the orca, they're considering that it's the orca's homeland, and when they cross the ocean, they make a prayer to the ocean, which is actually a prayer to the orca, and it's like a land acknowledgement. It's saying, yes, I'm coming through your territory. Now we're going to start the tour with a video in the exhibition that recorded some of the process of that first fishing trip that the Saanich took with Nick, and some of the ceremony that goes along with them. I'm starting the tour with that because you'll see that the video starts with Nick's voice, and I think it's very important that that be the tone that starts the tour, and that we remember that this story is a WSÁNEĆ story. It's not a legacy gallery story, and it's not my story. The video will focus on very much how the Reef Net brings people together.
I said my name's Humtholt, and I come from the Sayout community, and I'm from the Saanich Nation. My work has been focused on revitalizing the traditional knowledge system and practice of the Saanich Reef Net Fishery. And that was something that was wrongfully taken away from us probably a century ago. There are only a few last remaining reef net fishermen in my community. They're elders. So I've been really focused on trying to get this back to the community.
Okay, it's got to be lifted up a bit in the front here.
Reef net fishing it's a fishing technology that was given to us by, we believe, by the Creator and by the salmon people. The reef net did two things. It distinguished our people as a nation because we were the only people, the Straits Salish people were the only ones who had this reef net fishing technology. But it also brought us together as a nation. We're known as the Saanich people, and some people call us the saltwater people, because if you look at our traditional territory, it's just as much marine environment as it is land. So our territory is really water. The Douglas Treaty was, in our oral history, not necessarily a treaty in terms of how mainstream Canada thinks of a treaty as a land cession treaty. We feel it was more of a recognition of our nationhood and more of an agreement between two nations of people. One of the things that the Douglas Treaty says is that we're allowed to carry on our fisheries as formerly. Quite often you would hear our elders talk about the reef net as the princess of the tides. Just as women and females create life and give life, so does the reef net. It gives us life.
We're almost ready to set this.
Very exciting.
I'm like ready to put this on. Nick, you gotta watch this.
We're reef netting again. So it's a stationary technology. It's anchored. The lead is anchored. The canoes are anchored, and the net is suspended in the water between those canoes. And it took a lot of knowledge of the where the salmon would migrate, as well as the knowledge of the flow of the tides. That reef net fishery formed the core of our society at that time. It was the way we governed ourselves. It was the core of our spiritual society, core of our economic system, social system. It was really the backbone of our people. One of the things that my uncle said along this journey is he said, "I hear you want to bring the reef net fishery back." And I said, "Yeah, I do. You can't just go out and go fishing," he said. "You need to do it through ceremony first." So I've been working with the children in our local community school. We started to build this model net together. In that way, we learned together about the beliefs and the philosophies around this net. And it even became a centerpiece of the whole school year, where the teachers in the school, the socials teachers and the science teachers, started to teach their subject around this project. In that sense, it was kind of bringing back the reef net as a backbone of our education system. It's my vision, all of our vision, that we can all be reef net fishing people again.
The video was made as part of Nick's PhD dissertation when he and the Saanich people reef net fished for the first time in a very long time. And as you can see, we see them acknowledging a really deep relationship with the salmon and the ocean, and how the practice of the reef net is a backbone of their community, including the social, economic, political, and spiritual beliefs and systems that they had. The other interesting part of the video, and that Nick finds really important, is this idea that the reef net can be also the backbone to their education system, and that it is currently being used in the tribal school to teach the students not only social studies and sciences and math, but also the belief systems and full history of their community. Now we're looking at these three photos. We're going to look at some historical images of what the reef net looked like. These photos are from the 1930s, and as you saw in the video, or you heard in the video, in Canada the reef net fishing was banned, but in the United States they were able to carry on and reef net fish. So this is the Lummi people who live in Washington State in the 1930s. The title of the exhibition actually comes from the Douglas Treaties of 1852, which stated that the Saanich would be able to fish as formerly. However, the Shwala was systematically reduced by colonial systems for the next 50 years, and finally banned altogether in Canada in the 19th century. So here we see the Lummi people setting the net, bringing the canoes together, and bringing the fish out of the water. What's interesting about the Shwala is that it's unique to the Straits Salish peoples. The thing is, they had no salmon-bearing rivers. There's no salmon-bearing rivers in the Straits area. So they had to master sophisticated reef net technology, which they needed to have a really deep understanding of the salmon and of the ocean, and the migration routes and the natural systems that happened in the oceans. The reef nets were set to intercept the salmon on their return to the spawning grounds in rivers like the Fraser River. So the communities that had the knowledge were all Straits Salish communities, and only Straits Salish communities. So there's nowhere else in the world, nowhere else in British Columbia or in Canada that this technology is used. It's the Lekwungen people, the Songhees people, the Esquimalt, Beecher Bay, Tsuk, Malahat, Semiahmoo, Lummi, and Saanich people all did the reef net fishery. The reef net fishery was more than a technology. It was the basis for a way of life for the Straits Salish peoples, including belief systems, seasonal practices, and spiritual practices, with much ceremony. As Nick said in his video, his elder said, you can't do the reef net without doing ceremony. And the ceremony emphasized the deep relationship the Saanich people had with the natural world, specifically the salmon. So a couple of examples of, this is an image of the Lummi people again in ceremony related to the reef net. This is a ceremonial reef net model that they have with them. And even before the net was made, the actual fishing net, there were prayers during the harvest of the willow bark to make the net. The spiritual protector in the community called the salmon at the beginning of the summer in a ceremony that included prayer, singing, and thanking the sites, the islands, the winds, and the salmon. There was ceremony when they placed the anchor stones to hold the net down in the water. And at the end of the season, there was a ceremony where children would participate in a ritual of feeding each reef net site. So as you can see, and as Nick has stated, it was more than a technology. It was a whole belief system and way of life. It was the basis of the WSÁNEĆ way of life. Now we're going to look at a sculpture by John Elliott. Nick Claxton says that in the WSÁNEĆ worldview, the land doesn't belong to them, that they belong to the land, and that they care for the land and have a deep respect and relationship with the land. Nick Claxton is a Reef Net Captain, and here we have a Reef Net Captain pole that John Elliott carved. John Elliott is WSÁNEĆ, an educator and a SINTEN language speaker. The pole tells the story of the human spirit who gifted the SWOLE to the WSÁNEĆ people. The eagle on top shows the strength and qualities of a good fisher, so good eyesight, quick to respond, accurate. And below that, we see the captain, the Reef Net Captain, holding a net and ropes here and net weights. So these net weights are really interesting, big stones with holes through them. And below that is the face of a WSÁNEĆ relative in an anchor stone. She went to live with the salmon in exchange for the knowledge of the reef net. So the Reef Net Captain is a key person in the canoe, in the fishing canoe, and in the community. He watches for signs of the salmon coming, and then signals when to close the net, where to set the net, and when to close the net. And he is responsible for the reef net sites. So the sites are passed down through families, and the captain is responsible for taking care of the site and maintaining the right to fish. The captain would lead the team in fishing and was also responsible for sharing the catch among the community. A key part of the practice of reef net fishing was ecological conservation. The WSÁNEĆ people respected the salmon, and so they included ways for the salmon to thrive while they were also fishing and catching them. So this piece here that we're looking at is by Temoseng Chasz Elliott, who is an emerging WSÁNEĆ artist and also the nephew of John Elliott, who carved the pole. This piece is called Salish, and that means life. The Salish is a hole that's designed right into the net, and you'll see this here. Chasz has decided to highlight the Salish, and that Salish is meant to allow salmon to escape while some are being caught. So here you see one of the bigger salmon escaping from the Salish, and then in the background, you may not be able to see it, but there are other salmon caught in the net. It was really important for Chasz to work in community for this piece, and so he invited his family to tell him what they know about the reef net and to learn alongside him about the reef net. And together they helped him make the twine for this net. They needed to gather the willow, and just to make this small section of net, they needed to make 64 feet of twine from willow. So you can imagine how much work it would take to make a full-size net. Another act of conservation that was part of the practice of the SWOLE was when the largest salmon, or the king salmon, was caught, they shut down the fishery for 3 days and would take a rest, and that would give the salmon an opportunity to return to the spawning grounds, to pass through the net or the netting, the spawning area, and return to the spawning grounds. So once again, ensuring that there would be salmon available for the following year. It was interesting approaching and working with the emerging artists, the WSÁNEĆ artists, about this exhibition and about the reef net, because for them too it was an opportunity to learn about their culture and to be actively involved in the ecocultural revitalization and resurgence of their community. This piece is by Sarah Jim, and she's a WSÁNEĆ artist, and she calls this Moontide. She calls it Moontide because the WSÁNEĆ people are deeply connected to the tides, and the WSÁNEĆ calendar is a 13-moon calendar. They don't go on a 12-month calendar. It's a 13 moon calendar. So she was thinking about that and how that impacts, that the moon calendar impacts the seasons and the seasons impact the fishery. There are 4 salmon in the 13 moon calendar, and you see the 4 salmon here. So in this piece, once again, you see the Salish in the middle. You'll see the reef net and the 4 salmon. You see the Coast Salish design elements, the trigon, the crescent, a little bit of an oval here and a circle in the middle. You see the net and these net weights out here again with the hole in them. And then the interesting thing with this piece that she's highlighted is the eelgrass here. So the eelgrass was actually attached to the net to make the salmon feel comfortable and to kind of trick them into the net, into thinking that they're actually on the bottom of the ocean. So pretty interesting and creative and almost artistic part of the technology of the making of it. And the other part with this piece is that Sarah's really interested or taken by the fact that she wanted this to be from the salmon's perspective. So the salmon is swimming into the net and up toward the paler part, up toward the light at the top of the ocean. It's a view from the salmon's perspective. Sarah works at Sneedquith, which is Todd Inlet on Saanich territory, and she works on ecological restoration projects, and she is a SINTEN speaker and works at the Lekwungen tribal school as well as being an artist. Indigenous resurgence isn't something that is just started happening. It's been happening for a long time, ever since the potlatch ban and the ban on the reef net. The Saanich people and all Indigenous people have been working to rebuild their communities and their cultures. Here we see the Saanich Indian Territorial Declaration, and the 4 bands that make up the Saanich Nation, the Pakwachin, Sartlip, Sayout, and Saykum bands, all the chiefs of all those bands came together and made this declaration. And it was a response to the Douglas Treaties. And it says that they do not recognize any past efforts to separate them from their land. The treaties were treaties of peaceful coexistence, and this did not involve the sale of the rights to the land. Their sacred connection to the land is what establishes their territorial title. So here we have a whole wall dedicated to the Douglas Treaties. And so I'll just give you a little bit of a brief history. From 1850 to 1854, James Douglas, as part of the Hudson Bay Company, met with the Indigenous people of this place and arranged 14 treaties. They were oral agreements, so they weren't written originally, and they were seen by the settlers as land purchases. The First Nations, though, saw them as agreements of peaceful coexistence, as they said in the Saanich Declaration. There were translators present, but clearly there was meaning missed and worldviews were coming together. They didn't understand each other's relationships to the land and each other's understanding of ownership of land and, relationship to land. So later the treaties were written down, stating that the land belonged solely to the white people, but the First Nations could fish as formerly. So not only were the treaties kind of misunderstood in the beginning, but while the Saanich people were able to fish for a while as formerly, within 50 years, the colonial government banned the fishery, and Indigenous people were not allowed to get fishing licenses. So it was only the settler commercial fishermen that were allowed to fish. This piece on the mezzanine is called Network. It's by Dylan Thomas, who is the City of Victoria Indigenous Artist in Residence. And he made this piece in 2018. His interest in the reef net was this idea that it takes a lot of trust and collaboration for a team of fishers to be successful. Not only is there trust and collaboration within the team, but there's also trust and collaboration between nations So the nations had to communicate about their technology, their understandings, their reef net sites. They had to share together. And his design symbolizes this necessity for honest cooperation. In Dylan's artist statement about this piece, he talks about the practice of honest cooperation being essential to a path to reconciliation and Indigenous resurgence. So in the piece, you can see the salmon are all interlocked, and so I see that as his way of illustrating what it is like to work together, for the people to be connected, for the salmon to be connected, and for the people and the salmon to be connected together. And that's one of the things that one of the key principles of the Reef Net that Nick iterates every time I talk to him, is that the Reef Net brings people together. Okay, so this is the final piece that we're going to be looking at today, and it's by Colton, who is a non-Indigenous artist. It's called Pulse of the Salish Sea. And so he's interested in using scientific information, scientific data, and bringing it together with traditional Indigenous knowledge to support each other. So here he's got a map of, an interactive map of the Salish Sea. So the territory of the Straits Salish people, where they did their reef net fishery. In the top section there you'll see Vancouver, and then in the lower section it's the Gulf Islands, and to the south of that, Swartz Bay. So Colton used 30 years of salmon run data, data of currents, data of weather, and then development data to build this piece. And when I was thinking about it, I'm an artist as well. I went through a visual art degree, and I was like, what is he doing with all this data? And then I realized that when I take the ferry from Swartz Bay to TEMOSEN, you know, I'll enjoy myself. I might notice that it's raining or it's sunny, and you know, I might hope that I see a whale or count some eagles. But I don't really get a deep sense of this space. But if I were a reef net fisher and I had been fishing here for 30 years, I would hold a lived experience of 30 years of salmon runs, 30 years of weather data, and I would watch the development. I would watch the development of this space. And so I think that that's what Colton's getting at, is what is how can we use scientific data to uphold the experience of Indigenous people? I'd like to thank Nick Claxton and the Saanich people for sharing their stories of the Reef Net, to the artists in the exhibition for interpreting knowledge and understanding of the Reef Net, and to Katie Hughes for making this exhibition happen. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. And now it's time for question and answer. But before, I'd like to thank one more person. So I'd like to thank Nicole Aktimachuk. She's the Legacy Gallery's curatorial intern, and she did a whole bunch of work producing that video. So thank you, Nicole. And it's been a real honor for UVic, for us at the Legacy Galleries, to work with Nick and Katie to present this exhibition. A key part of our mandate is to mobilize the research of UVic faculty and students, as well as serving the larger community. And this project is a great example of this, where art has played an important role in telling the story of the Shwala and creating dialogue around ecocultural revitalization and land-based healing that supports local Indigenous efforts and also resonates globally. So we're going to get into the Q&A. I'll introduce Nick and Katie, and I have a few questions in the Q&A section. So if anybody has any questions, please write them in there, and we'll start our discussion. Maybe if Nick and Katie can come on board. Hi, Nick. Hi, Katie. So I'm just going to do a little intro, if you don't mind. So this is Nick Claxton. He's the chief of the Saanich Nation and teaches at UVic in the School of Child and Youth Care. His research is centered on the revitalization and resurgence of Indigenous knowledges through community-based and land-based healing. Nick's doctoral research focused on the revitalization of the Shwala, his community's traditional fishing practice. He worked to pull together the disappearing knowledge of the Shwala, reinvigorate cross-border cooperation between the Saanich and their Lummi relatives, and coordinate the community-based creation of and fishing of the first Shwala on Canadian waters in over 100 years. His project involved reconnecting many elders, youth, and community members. It marked the beginning of a long-term journey of resurgence and intergenerational resilience that continues. Thanks for being with us, Nick. It's great to have you here, and it was great working with you on this exhibition and sharing it with the public. And our other curator is Katie Hughes, who's a recent graduate, congratulations, of the Public History MA program in the UVic History Department and a museum professional. Her graduate research focused on the sharing the Saanich story of the revitalization of the Shwala with the public. Collaborating with Nick Claxton, Katie's research involved working with a broad range of Indigenous and non-Indigenous community members, elders, and artists to develop content and artworks for the exhibition. Drawing from Indigenous cultural and oral histories and colonial historical sources, Katie focused on capturing the history of the Reef Net and its resurgence. Katie's currently on maternity leave from her position as Community Engagement Coordinator here at Legacy Galleries. So thank you so much, Katie, for taking time from your family to be with us here tonight. Yeah, so I'll start with some questions. Yeah, I think we've covered everything from the audience in terms of what they need to know. I'm just checking the Q&A. Thank you. Yeah, there's some good questions there. So, Nick, I wanted to start with you. And I'm wondering if you could start by telling us some of the things that you learned through the process of working to revitalize the Shwala and how engaging in this work has benefited your community.
Sure, thank you. I think one of the biggest lessons for me, this really comes from spending a lot of time with my late Uncle Earl, who you saw in the video. At the end of that video there, his name was Yates. One of the biggest, I think, lesson was how we were related to the salmon, and that's that lesson that you referred to in the video about how our language expresses that. You know, the names for the salmon in our language, the prayer names, that is, actually refer to salmon through concentric sort of relationality, as if they're relatives of ours. And that's really big, really big lesson that I learned. And I think it's something that that's much the same ways we would view many things in our natural world. And I think it's a really big lesson that would really help all of us.
To bring us closer to the natural world and learn from the natural world.
Yeah, and I guess live in a very sustainable way.
Yeah, thank you. Katie, this was a huge project for you to take on. Can you tell us why you thought it was important to put the exhibition together and what some of your goals were, what you were hoping to achieve?
Sure, yeah. So, sorry, what was the first question, Jillian?
Just why did you think it was important to make this into an exhibition?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm a museum worker and I'm kind of returning back to school to go study public history. And a big part of public history and kind of the main focus is to take history and put it into a digestible format. So an exhibition to me makes sense. That's a way that a lot of people can understand and absorb information. So because it's such an important part of our history here, that a lot of people just don't know about. And that's something that as a museum worker, I've observed at Legacy Gallery, is that when we put on exhibitions that share local Indigenous history, most people don't know about that history. And so for me, it's become a big part of what I hope to focus on for my career, is to play some kind of small part and to help to share the Straits Salish and local history of the place where we live with the wider public. And so that was my hope with this exhibition, is that we could kind of reach a wider audience of the story that Nick and his community is already working on, but I think a lot of people just might not know about it. So that was the main goal for me and main hope. And I think that COVID interfered with that a little bit, but it's really exciting that we're here today, and that I think a lot of people have responded really well to the exhibition. So I think we accomplished that a lot, and I hope that it can continue in some form in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. We've had so many comments from people saying that they didn't know about this and they're glad to know about it and they'd like to know more. And yeah, we've created the tour and some videos that will last and some educational materials. So hopefully we can carry on sharing the story. Yeah, so there's a question here about, could we hear about the Saanich Youth Reef Net project last July? Can you speak to that, Nick?
Sure thing. So that project this summer was entirely youth-led, youth-driven. I'm really happy that two of my children were a part of it, and I helped out as much as I could, but it was definitely something that was completely driven by the youth, and they took it upon themselves, took their own initiative to learn as much as they could and build a reef net and plan everything out, make the connections and actually go out and try to conduct a fishery as well in August. It was just amazing to see, and really I think that's a reflection of this broader, I think, resurgence movement, and I can't wait to see where it goes next.
So are you thinking that there will be another program next year? Will the youth carry on, or new youth be involved? Nick, what are you thinking about for that?
I think the plan is to have that, maybe become a yearly thing and grow the interest and have more youth involved learning, and the youth that were part of last year could be sort of mentors as well. So it's just a way of mobilizing that knowledge. I think it's really awesome.
Yeah, the youth came to the Legacy Gallery. It was really great to meet them. They were really engaged, and I think they may have learned some things from the exhibition, but they had lots to teach us as well. So that exchange was invaluable for us working here to see how the project is continuing and how engaged the community is. Yeah, so was there programming as part of this exhibition and work that had to be left out or adapted due to the pandemic? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Katie?
Yeah, so there were a lot of moments where we had to pivot, and the pandemic really, in some ways, I was thinking about it today, in some ways I think it made it better, and in other ways we did lose some aspects of it. Like I had hoped, Nick and I had talked about kind of having it like a community celebration, where a lot of the community would have been able to come and also celebrate. And then also a lot of people that worked on the exhibition would have been able to kind of all meet each other and as Nick says, kind of be brought together. And so we've tried to adapt and do that in small ways here and there with small gatherings and that kind of thing. There were, I'm trying to think if there was work that didn't make it in the show. There was one artist who I was in discussion with who was from the US, who it would have been amazing had he been able to have his work in the exhibition. And that wasn't able to happen. But I think the main thing was we had planned to do videos with knowledge keepers in the exhibition. So like John Elliott and various people, little interviews. And that was one thing that didn't happen. That was really hard because of the pandemic. But what's been exciting that's happened after the fact was the videos that we made with the emerging artists that everyone you can watch on YouTube. And there we were able to kind of recapture some of that, the Saanich voices in the exhibition directly. So that's probably a few examples of what ways we had to shift our and pivot.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider is that we've had several large university classes be able to access the exhibition because we have created the online programming. So there have been some benefits that way. Yeah, so we're missing the people in person for sure, but it's been great to reach out to classes of 50 and 60 students with the exhibition. Nick, there's a question. Sorry, I'm not so great at making this somewhat anonymous platform less anonymous. So sorry, I didn't mention the people's names who asked those last questions, but there's a question here from Patty Sullivan. Who made the net, Nick, and how were women and children involved? And can we see the reef net fishing practiced in various areas today? So that's 3 different questions, I guess. Do you know who made the net, Nick?
I guess you're talking in traditional times.
I think so, yeah.
Sections of net were made by, I mean, it was a really family affair. I think all guided by usually the head of the family, but usually, yeah, every member of the family contributed probably to the harvesting, to the construction of the twine, and then putting it all together. And it also happened almost probably year round, working on it. The nets were made new every season, so there was definitely a lot of work. Youth and children were particularly involved in the ceremonial aspects of reef net fishing, and I think those are some things that we could focus our future work on, revitalizing those songs and ceremonies. In terms of seeing it today, I mean, hopefully we can reef net fish some more. You could, if you're interested, Google search Lummi Island Wild. They fish with reef nets in a modern sense, and I think that's really awesome. And they're promoting that as a model sustainable fishery, but it's essentially it's our knowledge that's been appropriated. So that's where I'd like us to get to one day. Hopefully that answers all 3 of those questions.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, and kind of to follow up on that, we were kind of interested from legacy gallery folks end of things, that given that it's been so long since the Saanich fished, how was the knowledge kept and passed down, and how did you learn about it? How did you learn to do it? Can you answer that one, Nick?
Yeah, much of that. Well, there is a book that was written by my late Uncle Earl and Uncle John Elliott Sr. They wrote a book called The Saanich Reef Net Technology, and they really tried to capture as much as they could, remember and recall and I guess capture as a future learning resource. So I relied on that, as well as talking with them both and other elders. But I think there's also that sort of idea and aspect that the best way to learn about doing something is by doing it, right? So that's kind of where my project started off.
Yeah, I could really see that with the youth. I think they felt like they learned so much by doing, and they learned what they didn't know and what they needed to learn as well. So yeah, just diving right in and sort of figuring it out as they go. So yeah. Okay, so then there's a question here from Caroline Stengel about why the net was made of willow bark rather than cedar bark.
Yeah, I've been trying to answer some of those questions in the Q&A too. I typed
Oh,
the
okay.
answer to that
Oh,
one.
sorry.
But essentially, I've been told that willow bark, it could be made very thin, but it maintains its strength, and it doesn't deteriorate in the salt water. That's what I heard. So, but cedar bark was also used for some of the ropes and things, right? So it wasn't all made out of willow bark, but the net part was, and probably a sacred reason behind that too.
That was great to hear that Chasz went out and harvested the bark, the willow, and that you're growing it at the tribal school. Is that right, Nick? The willow?
Yeah, before the year, let's see, not last year, but the year before, towards the end of the year, we started to do a restoration project, replanting willow on the school grounds in a sort of a wetland area as a sort of a living educational area. But that project's been on hold for a little while, as you can understand.
Yes. So I guess I'm not totally sorry. I'm not totally following what you've answered, what you haven't, but this is an interesting question anyway. You mentioned that Nick, you mentioned that the Salish people honor the orca. This is from Christiane Smith. Did Straits Salish people also hunt orcas? From George.
Yeah, no, not that I know of. So just to clarify, I guess Quanus is whale. All whales, I guess, essentially, not just orca. So our word for ocean, squana, includes that. So it's like the whale's home, I guess, is what our word for ocean is. But yeah, no, we didn't hunt them.
Lots of questions about the technology. How were the anchor stones set? Did people free dive down in the sea to place them?
The main anchor stones were set using the canoes and then rafting them together. This is from what I've been told. And then you could tie, lines around the stone and use the rising tides to lift up that big boulder essentially, and then you would paddle it into place and then set it. And once they were set, that's where they left them. They were never retrieved, right? So there is some underwater archaeological studies, and I think the exhibit shows that in one of the other videos, sort of underwater videos of the Reef Net sites, accumulations of anchor stones.
Yeah, it's amazing the power of the tides. Hey, what can be moved with the ocean when you work with the ocean like that? They could move that heavy stone. Yeah. Okay. So, and then Caroline also wanted to know how the holes were drilled into the stones.
There's definitely lots that needs to be learned and relearned. But what I've been told is that anchor stones, like the small ones like you have in the exhibit with the hole in it, the net weights, were I guess, placed in a spot where water trickled slowly, and then using pebbles or other harder stones to just gradually drill it out, and then you flip it over and do the other side. Yeah, so, but I also think it probably took probably specialized knowledge and probably sort of probably, you know, spiritual sacred skills that not everybody had either, right? So
Yeah. I'm not sure if you can see this in the chat, Katie, but what I saw in the exhibition was a real elevation of work already being done in cultural revitalization, as well as showcasing of amazing young artists. This seems different than what I have historically seen done in the museum world, which strikes me as a positive shift. Can you speak to some of the steps that you took as a curator to ensure that the guiding force was the Indigenous perspective? That's from Colby Stafford. Thanks for that question.
Thanks, Colby. So that was probably one of the most challenging things that I had to think about. And a lot of the time I was kind of reading from different sources, and sometimes I would find like conflicting information and like a colonial source that was different from the book that Nick mentioned, or something in Nick's dissertation, like minutia little things. And it was in those moments and through conversation with Nick at various times, and just kind of relying on a lot of what I'd some of the new research in museum studies, thinking about centering Indigenous voices and Indigenous stories. So that was something that I spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to figure out how to do that, how to take myself almost out of the equation as much as possible, and make sure that that it was not my voice that was represented in the exhibition, but was Nick's dissertation for the major themes of the exhibition, and also the book that Nick focused on or mentioned, the Reef Net Fishery book. It's actually a children's book, but it's got an incredible amount of knowledge in it. So those were kind of two of the cornerstones of the exhibition. And then from there, it was fortunately I was lucky enough to speak with John Elliott, who's an elder and knowledge keeper, language speaker, SINTEN speaker, and tried to really focus on their perspectives as much as possible and put that in the exhibition. And then also another aspect of that was talking to different artists, talking to people, and inviting different Saanich artists to participate in the exhibition. So it's really just trying to put as much Saanich perspective in the exhibition as I could find, and just to center that as much as possible, and just always kind of keep that in mind through the process and bounce things off Nick. And that was another thing, is that I didn't really make any decisions without Nick and I had kind of monthly meetings, and I'd have a big list of things to talk to him about. He'd kind of go yes, no. And so that was really important to me, to make sure that he understood every aspect of what was happening, and to make sure that I didn't kind of go off on a tangent. So I think maybe the best answer to that was partnering with Nick, and being having the privilege to partner with him was the most important aspect of that, to make sure that I wasn't kind of straying from the course that he and I had set early on. Yeah.
Thanks, Katie.
Pleasure.
There are a lot of questions. Nick, there's a question from Megan McCord. Can you speak to how we can effectively weave two-eyed seeing and Western conservation science to best conserve salmon and forage fish in the Salish Sea?
yeah, I'm familiar with that concept of two-eyed seeing, where sort of you have this Indigenous eye and this Western scientific eye, and you use both to see, you know, examine what you're looking at from both perspectives. I think that's good. I think, as I mentioned, there's a sort of teaching around the salmon being relatives and just viewing the natural world that way. I think that's consistent with how traditionally we would have looked at trees, orcas, deer, all sort of that having a human spirit that we were related to in some way. And I think there's a lesson in that in terms of how you treat them. Like they're not commodities to be bought and sold and to make money off of and profit. So that's sort of different. It's a different paradigm, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So I think there's value in that. But I often think about, that notion of two-eyed seeing takes for granted the Indigenous perspective, and I think that's where Indigenous resurgence situates itself, strengthening that Indigenous paradigm. So I think that's where I really feel like I focus a lot of my work, but I think it's also not to say that all of us have a responsibility to learning about each other's perspectives, right? So I think that's one of the reasons why I thought this exhibit would be really powerful, is that it's educational for everybody.
Great, thanks. So we're getting close to 8, but I'm going to take a couple more questions if you don't mind. So there's a question for both of you from Andrea Walsh. Some of it's been answered, but I think it's a great one for us gallery workers. What have you both learned working together as co-curators about using the space of the art gallery or the exhibition that is land and water rights for the Saanich peoples as it is about contemporary art? So how has the gallery been a useful space for you, Nick, in terms of community goals? And Katie, how has your understanding of the gallery changed through this experience?
Well, I know Andrea, and she knows me, so I'm gonna direct it to her a little bit because we've worked together before, and for me, it was basically a totally new experience. I in the past have been working on exhibitions, not in a curatorial capacity. I'm thinking about kind of like the minutia on a daily basis, and really the space is like how pieces fit together and how to kind of design the space. Whereas in this exhibition, I think I thought it would be more like that once it got down to actually putting the pieces together, but it was so much more complicated because you're thinking about not only how to piece the pieces together in space, but also in themes and ideas. And so that was, and in art with art. And at first I really didn't know how I would incorporate art into the space. And I think it was actually Jillian who urged me to kind of approach contemporary artists to be in the exhibition. And so that really expanded my understanding of what an exhibition could be. This is, initially was a historical exhibition, but it's really transformed in my mind and understanding that an exhibition can kind of encompass historical ideas, but I really feel like at the start of learning how to marry that with contemporary art. And so that was pretty exciting aspect of learning how to curate a space. So I hope that answers it somewhat.
Yeah. And Nick, I think Andrea was asking, how did this forward and your goals, if it did, in terms of sharing your research through a gallery space?
Yeah, for me, when I was first asked about this opportunity, I just jumped at it because it's I saw it as an opportunity for our vision was, I think, having school tours going through, and I was thinking about students at tribal school just as much as I was thinking about students in the public school system going through there and learning about it. I think that's it's part of it. I think a big part of it for me was spending time. You know, I've had the opportunity over the last number of years to teach alongside artists like Chris Paul and Perry LaFortune, and not being an artist myself, but seeing, you know, that worldview, Straits Salish worldview reflected in art is just as, you know, just as much. So art to me expresses that worldview just the same way as fishing with the reef net does. So I think it's just a natural fit, natural part of our knowledge system, just as, you know, languages, I guess, right? So it's all definitely intertwined, and I think that's very important to me.
Great. There's a question here from Vanessa Udi. Maybe this might be the last one. And she wanted you to elaborate a little bit on the story of the woman who married. Sorry, I recall a story about people marrying salmon and being gifted the reef net. Could you tell us more about the story and how it shapes the Saanich worldview and legal order? So we referred to that briefly in the tour. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, referring to the origin of the reef net. You know, our oral history says that a young Saanich girl was, you know, fell in love with a young man while they were visiting relatives in a different land across the Salish Sea, and they fell in love. And so the real quick version of it is that he asked for her hand in marriage, but according to sort of traditional law, he needed to live within her community for a time before they went to live in his community. And that was during that time when that man sort of gave, in a spirit of reciprocity, the gift of the reef net. He taught the Saanich people how to use it, how to fish with it, how to construct it. And that was in exchange for the opportunity to marry that young girl. And when it came time for them to travel back to his homelands, the story says that they packed their canoe and all their belongings and paddled out into the deep, and the canoe just dove under and disappeared under the water. And that was the last time they saw them. But that was when it was revealed that to the Saanich people that he was the human form of the salmon people. And so in that way, we're almost directly related to the salmon, right? And that's what I was referring to in terms of our language, reflecting that belief. And my late Uncle Earl was telling me about how the reef net symbolizes that young Saanich girl. And if you were to take a sort of an aerial view of the reef net, it takes the shape of that person, you know, with arms and legs and sort of a body. And he also referred to that the hole in the net where salmon could escape was kind of like the birth canal. So it's like she was giving birth to salmon. So that's that's where that story and our beliefs come from about the salmon.
Oh, sorry, Jillian. You're...
Yeah, here I am. Yeah, we're getting close to 10 after 8, and I think that's a great place to end with an origin story. I thank you so much for sharing that story, Nick. I value that a lot, and for all of the work that you've both done on this exhibition to share these efforts, the revitalization efforts, and to help us to understand how much work goes into resurgence, and for us all to be able to connect more deeply with this place. So Thank you very much. And thank you all the audience for your great questions. And we'll try to answer some of them by writing, and I think we can capture them and get back to people if you have questions. I know someone asked about schools being able to access this, and Nick brought that up. So we do have a program that we can offer online. So please get in touch. You can contact me through the website, and we will be putting it out to schools again to let them know that we can do this online. So yeah, despite the pandemic, it's been a really great exhibition run and reached so many people. So congratulations to both of you, and thank you so much for being here tonight.